kind of help things, and we are recording, so that would kind of help things go along if you could stay to the end and help us with a survey. Anybody who works in nonprofit knows how important that is to us, so we appreciate you, and if you could fill that survey out, we use it to help us with future presentations and things like that. I'm going to get my notes out here and make sure that I am not forgetting anything. And well, I'm going to go ahead and introduce Rebecca Morgan. She served as the director of the Middlesex Department of Social Services since 2012. And while I feel like that was yesterday, it was almost 10 years. Is that right? She has worked in 3 local Department of Social Service agencies in Virginia. She is currently serving as the legislative committee chair for the Virginia League of Social Service Executives, and she is the past chair for the Child and Family Services Committee. Rebecca has served on various work groups related to advancing Virginia initiatives in the child welfare field, and most recently serving on the Commission on Youth's Legal Guardianship of Minor work group. She serves locally on the Middlesex Foundation Board that is currently working on the affordable housing options for the community. She graduated here locally from the College of William and Mary with a Bachelor of Arts degree in psychology, and she has a master's degree of education in community counseling from also the College of William and Mary. And that's pretty impressive. So I am going to welcome you, and I really appreciate you coming on today, Rebecca.
Yeah, thanks, Leslie. I'm very glad to be here today, and encourage everyone, as Leslie and I are chatting, to just please put questions in the chat or raise your hands. And I know speakers always say this at the beginning, but I do prefer more of a discussion. If you have a question or something pops in your mind, ask now. And always follow up with Leslie. I'm available afterwards for questions as well if you think of something later.
Yeah, and a side note, you are amazing responding to emails. Like if I send you an email, I know I'm going to get a response right away. It's amazing. So not to set the bar too high, but that's awesome.
No, it's because I get 300 a day. And if you don't do that, then they pile up, and that causes anxiety. So yes. There's my tip for the day.
I love it. I love it. So Avalon and Middlesex Social Services, we've kind of worked together for a good amount of time, and it's a great partnership. I just wanted to kind of start out and talk about your role with survivors of domestic violence and sexual assault. So we're just going to jump right in and hit it hard.
Yeah, so our role as an agency varies. And so, for instance, if we're talking about the elderly population, and sadly, that's considered 60 and over in Virginia, if you can believe it, or a disabled adult between the ages of 18 and 59, in a situation, if someone was a victim of sexual assault or domestic violence, then we would open an adult protective services case. And we would work hand in hand with law enforcement to investigate the allegations. And while we would not certainly be involved in the criminal proceedings, that happens at the Commonwealth Attorney's Office and through our local sheriff's office, we do in adult protective services, depending on who the alleged perpetrator is. We do have the authority to share that information with various licensing boards across the state. We also have the option to do a finding in the matter that's documented in the record. And then we can offer tons of services to that adult. So here locally, and many local social services departments have community funds through local grants and other opportunities where we could potentially help with relocating or other services that adult might need. For children in that situation, it depends on who the perpetrator is. So if the perpetrator was a caregiver, then yes, we would be involved in terms of child protective services. If it was not a caregiver, we might be asked by law enforcement to conduct a forensic interview of that child. And so that being able to provide that service locally means that child doesn't have to travel to CHKD in the Norfolk area or VCU in the Richmond area, which helps with the trauma piece, and not having to have that child. If you can imagine going to the doctor and there's an hour car drive, even if you're just getting a simple test, that causes anxiety. And so even to just reduce that minimal amount of stress for a child and their parent is a benefit. And so we often do that at the request of law enforcement.
That's great. That's great. So kind of moving on from that, as we're talking about kids, domestic violence it doesn't just affect women. And I think that is a common misconception. But can we talk about some of the effects that you see in the children, especially in this community?
Absolutely. And so when we work with families where the children may have witnessed domestic violence between caretakers, and it doesn't always have to be mom and dad. It could be mom and mom. It could be dad and dad. It could be mom and grandma. It could be a variety of circumstances. Oftentimes, children take weeks, months, years to disclose that they even knew what was going on. And oftentimes, those kids get caught in the middle, both literally, if there's a physical altercation, and get caught in the middle in terms of the psychological warfare that's kind of going back and forth, and feeling like they have to choose a side, protect younger siblings, keep that secret. And so they're not able to have the childhood that we would want for our kids. They're burdened with all of those impacts of that domestic violence. Also, children who live in a home where domestic violence is occurring obviously are at a much greater risk to be abused, and maybe not physically, but obviously mental abuse, emotional abuse, and or neglect. Often, as we all know, substance abuse coincides with domestic violence, and kids can be abused and neglected during those type of situations. Maybe they're not getting enough food to eat. Maybe they're not getting to school on time, help with homework, the basics that we expect for our kids.
Yeah, it's and I think that's also another misconception while we're kind of on that. It's domestic violence is not just a physical assault behavior. So it's a wide array of behaviors that that pretty much are designed to establish control. And I feel like that's another common misconception, right? And I think the general population doesn't understand that. Would you agree with me, or?
Yeah, absolutely. And I'll tell a quick story about a client we worked with a couple of years ago. And so while there was no physical domestic violence, and really not mental abuse in terms of name calling or demeaning or anything like that, what we had in this situation, and it was subtle, and it took us a while even to pick up on it, it was social isolation, which in a rural community is very easy to do. And what we eventually figured out is the abuser had isolated his partner to the point where she had no transportation. She was completely cut off from her family, who did not live close by. She did not have access to a phone during the day because he said he needed it for work. And she's got, several children at home. And this sort of backed into COVID. So then that added yet another level of isolation. And in a rural community, obviously, there's no public transportation other than Bay Transit. However, that's difficult to navigate with two small children. And so what we came to figure out was that was a different kind of domestic violence in terms of this particular victim being completely isolated, really from the outside world, no internet, even no cable. And so that was a lesson for all of us. And you're right, Leslie, we've got to look beyond just, what we can see, and look underneath and figure out a person's story and how they came to be where they are. And she, it hit me. I just happened to be on call and responded to this situation. Was just going through, well, who's your family? And she was telling me, and I said, well, what about your friends? And she just kind of looked at me and she said, well, I don't have any friends. And I mean, she's someone in her early 20s who should have a gaggle of female friends, or male. And I said, oh, and so that was sort of the first clue. And then the more we found out, the more we figured out that over time, all of that was intentional for this particular client. And so we worked and of course referred for counseling and tried to put some other services in place to address this.
Yeah, and I think on an Avalon side of things, we talk about the power and control wheel. And from what I understand, we get survivors that come in and say, well, he just hit me this week. This has just been happening. But if you look at that power and control wheel and you look back at all of the different factors before it escalated to physical violence, you will see that that abuse started long before they even realized it was happening. It starts with isolation, financial isolation. So it's interesting and sad at the same time that these issues keep happening. And so I think as a community, we kind of need to look at the whole picture and not just look for the bruises.
Absolutely.
Yeah. You know, and studies are also showing that domestic and sexual abuse are found in every economic and social group. They are seen in every racial and every ethnic group. And pretty consistent with what you're seeing in Middlesex.
Yeah, and I think Middlesex is sort of an interesting, somebody could do a fascinating case study here because Middlesex, as many of you know, of course, is a rural community, but we have a very small sort of middle class. And so we get the extremes in wealth. So we have our lower income folks and we have our very wealthy folks who maybe have retired here from larger metropolitan areas. And I think they come here thinking they can sort of hide and that the spotlight's not going to be on them. But what they don't realize is in a small town, that for anyone who grew up in a small town is just simply not true. And so I think that for us, we might pick up on these situations a little bit more than we would in a more urban area. But no, it doesn't matter about your socioeconomic status. Sexual abuse, domestic violence, while the ways in which it occur might be harder to uncover at a higher socioeconomic level. It's there, we see it, and had a case not too long ago, multi-millionaire family, and just tragic circumstances that occurred, and so money is irrelevant when it comes to these kinds of and types of abuse.
It really does not discriminate at all. It goes across all borders. It's generational a lot of times, and it's very sad. And we talk about that too from an education standpoint. Do you think that there are survivors out there that don't know that they're being abused, that don't understand because maybe they haven't reached the point that, and I feel like it could be an education piece where we could start educating our community on what, that's not okay. What, this is a healthy relationship. This is not. Is social services got anything on that or moving forward with any piece of that?
Yeah, so it's so funny what popped in my mind. And this was a sort of conversation I had with a couple, and it's probably been 10 or more years ago, and they were in my office, and I was just happened to be the only one here. So I was talking to them, and the more we got talking, and this was at times physical domestic violence between both of them, and there was some psychological stuff going on between the both of them. And I finally looked at them and I said, do you guys realize that this isn't how your relationship should be going? And they looked at me clueless. For them, it was completely normal. And they didn't see anything wrong with it. And we don't look at what happened. we look at, why and the root cause and what happened to you. And so we try to dig into their past a little bit and share that with their counselor of how did you grow up? What did you see? Turns out one was raised by a single parent, never really saw relationship dynamics. The other had domestic violence amongst, their family. And so they thought that they were completely normal and that the back and forth between each of them in a public building with, a social services rep, they didn't see anything wrong with it. And I also think too that some of the initial signs, like we talked about earlier, can be so subtle. And I think sometimes folks get themselves into this situation and they wake up one day, whether it's the school or us or law enforcement or whoever, and it's a wake up call for them. Oh my gosh, what have I let myself get into? And if you ask our clients, and we do, what did you see for yourself, or what do you think is a healthy relationship? They know, they can tell you, and then you point out to them the ways in which their current situation doesn't match up. And sometimes it's a revelation, and sometimes it takes years and other events and kind of hitting bottom to get to that realization. And I'm sure you all see those dynamics play out over and over again as folks come to you for services.
We do, and it's interesting because the changes are so subtle, and I say this over again. It almost sounds trite when I say it, but I do get asked this question a lot when I do presentations. Is I don't understand why she doesn't just leave, and the answer to that question is complicated. It is very complicated, and we have programs to kind of help you understand that. But it's important to note that the abuser is not abusive all the time. And I think that is a common misconception. It starts out very subtle and escalation happens, but there is also that love piece that we can't ignore. We can't not talk about that. Just because that person violated, and it may not be the healthiest relationship to be in, as a human, you can't just turn off that love, because it's something that we can talk about. And I think sometimes looking from the outside, you kind of roll your eyes and say you shouldn't love somebody like that. But let's be honest. Let's not skate around it. Let's talk about it. And I think those pieces are all part of the puzzle that we all need to acknowledge. So that was my 2 cents on that piece. But I feel like with social services and Avalon, because we work so closely together, do you think that there's a misconception in the community, and that maybe there's some people out there that aren't getting help that maybe need it? Or would there be, fears in regards to social services? And can we put any of those fears to rest?
Yeah, so that's a great question, Leslie. And I think that there's kind of two main elements. And the first being, obviously, no one wants Child Protective Services knocking on their door. I don't care who you are. And we are feared. We're the baby snatchers. We take children, and trust me, we do not want your children. And I tell my staff all the time, like, that needs to be sort of like, I'm such and such from here, but then you need to say, I'm here to help. We don't want to break your family up. We want to figure out how to keep your family together, and here's how we can do that. So I think Child Protective Services obviously has lots of misconceptions about what we do and what our goals are. And but again, we are here to help families stay together and do whatever we need to do to make that happen. And so we are not out to take anyone's children. Trust me, we do not want them. We have situations where, yes, children have to come into foster care, but we bend over backwards and do everything we can to prevent that. Because guess what? That's even more traumatic for kids than many times the abuse that they are currently living with every day. So, and the second part to that is, I think social services in the community sometimes, oh, well, that's for, poor people, or that's for people who don't have jobs, or, don't have any education, or that's not for me. I don't need social services. And maybe you're right. Maybe you don't. However, we are here to serve every single person in this community, especially in smaller localities across Virginia. Sometimes we're it. Um, we serve people who, as I said, have very high socioeconomic profiles because we're sort of the gateway to get to what service you need for many things that have nothing to do with income levels or anything like that. And again, in a rural community, if you want a service or need to know how to do something, sometimes we're it. We're the only game in town. And so I think trying to get people over that stigma of walking through our doors or calling us. And so one thing that's kind of been effective, I've tried kind of put the word out to some of our county leaders. Look, you guys are out there, you're hearing these stories. You got to help me out, and you got to let me know what people are saying. And if you encounter someone, whether it be your neighbor, someone at church who's going through a rough time. And so that really, to some extent, I think the word of mouth, especially in a small community, has helped some.
Mhm.
And but COVID sort of, those efforts, we weren't able to get out into the community. We still aren't to the levels that we were before COVID. And but yeah, I think that social services in general gets the bad rap of things sometimes. And trust me, I don't tell people what I do in social situations, because then I hear, well, social services took my kids and this, so I don't know. Sometimes I'm a flight attendant, sometimes I'm a banker, sometimes
Oh.
my favorite standard line is I work in human services for the county. And that just sort of ends the conversation because that's not very interesting. But I never tell people what I do. So.
I can appreciate that. And while we're kind of on that subject, so if kind of a role play, if I was a domestic violence survivor and I needed help, what kind of services do you guys offer, or what's the process? How would that work?
So in Middlesex and in many communities, we would serve if there wasn't an adult protective services or child protective services case, if those criteria weren't met. If there were children in the home under the age of 18, we could open a prevention case for you and your family, and we could offer a variety of services, counseling. Here in Middlesex, that's available at the school. It's available here in our office a couple of times a week, and close by. Um, we could offer referrals for in-home services if your kids were having some behavioral um, impacts as a result of the domestic violence. We could certainly refer you to Avalon and the group um, therapy opportunities there. And then we've got that local funding. And so I remember we helped out a client who was a survivor, domestic violence survivor, had not had a CPS case. And she somehow on her own found a really good job. She's very bright. We did not help her with that. However, had she come to us and applied for what we call our TANF program, there's a component to that where we help with job search and job placement. And we work with our local community college, RCC, Rappahannock Community College. But again, that's a statewide program, so that's available anywhere. And so clients can get job coaches to help with that. But this particular client, she had found this job somehow. She was living in her car with her child, and she just hadn't asked for help. She had come in and applied for SNAP, and I think just kind of got talking to her benefits worker and just sort of broke down. And the benefits worker, runs in and is like, can we help? Yes, we can help her. And so what we were able to do was help with rent. And we were able to do, deposit first month's rent and pay an outstanding power bill and refer her to our local Hands Across Middlesex, which helps with furniture. And, so we kind of got the ball rolling for her. And so, no, we didn't necessarily have a mandated reason to be in her life, but she opened up and we were able to help. So.
Oh, that's such a great story. I love that story. I think I've heard you tell that story before, and I love it. And that's the thing, is social services is there to help. Avalon's there to help. And as you're talking about, one of the benefits with Avalon is everything is free of charge, right? So that helps. And it's not just, well, I can't, a good point is, even if you are well off and you're in the higher economic status, if you are trying to get therapy and safety planning and you bill your insurance, guess where that explanation of benefits is going? It's going to your house and probably whoever is on the insurance program. So, when confidentiality, big deal, super big deal, especially when you're dealing with domestic violence. So I think it's important to note those things and let people know that it's not just I can't pay. It's this needs to be confidential. It needs to be between me and my counselor. It needs to be between me and social services. So it's one of those little things that I wanted to plug in there and make sure that people knew. Switching gears a little bit, what about sexual assault? Do you guys offer services?
We do, and so again, it depends on obviously if the child was sexually assaulted by a caregiver and is under the age of 18, yes, we would take that case. Disabled 18 to 59 or 60 and over, we would take an adult or a child protective services case. For someone else, again, we would do the same, mostly referral to Avalon or other counseling services that we provide free of charge. And again, if somebody was in a situation where they didn't want to go through their insurance, or maybe they couldn't afford their copay, then we'll take care of that. We have federal and state funding and local funding that helps with that. And just a general, let's try and rebuild your life after this, and let's look at, and sometimes again, it's years before people will even disclose that happened to them. I think that's another misconception, and this is a whole another conversation that I would love to know. Sometimes, yes, it's immediately reported, but again, sometimes it's years, and sometimes we're the first people who are hearing that story, and it happened 5, 10, 20 years ago. And so at that point, asking that question, what happened to you to lead you to now be at social services in need of food stamps? And again, our staff, I can't say enough how compassionate they are, and how taken off guard they are by so many of these stories that a lot of times the client has never shared with anyone. And so yeah, I went way down the rabbit hole with that one, Leslie, sorry.
Oh, no, it's perfect. That's why I love these conversations, because we talk about things that are relevant. And I do think that that's relevant. And so it brings up a point that wasn't on my spreadsheet, but I do want to talk about it, is a lot of our domestic violence survivors and our sexual assault survivors aren't survivors from last week. Right? These are issues that started years and years and years ago, and there are many reasons these things aren't reported. Shame is one of them. So when we talk at Avalon, when I talk to people, and I'll talk to people in their community, and they're like, what can I do? And I think as a community member, in my opinion, the most important thing you can do is offer validation, and offer validation that what happened to you is not okay, and that the way you feel is perfectly appropriate to what's happened to you. And I think as a society, a lot of times we pull back in offering that. And I think it's important to mention that some of these things have gone on for years, and that just because it happened years ago doesn't mean that you cannot get services. So I do want to make that pretty important. How are you guys doing with COVID?
So yeah, COVID's so much fun.
Great.
So I'll tell you, COVID really shined a spotlight on food insecurity, just in general, and shined a spotlight on lack of broadband, especially in rural communities, and also let us know what people really need when kind of everything else socially is kind of stripped away. And so our caseloads, they haven't doubled. I'm not going to be that dramatic, but they have increased, I'd say 20, 30%. And the influx of applications we have received has just been a tsunami. That said, the federal government did put some did give us some concessions, and so we did not have to do a full interview. For instance, obviously we couldn't because people couldn't come in person to do that, and so there have been ways that we've been able to balance that. That said, I think our workers from day one really stepped up, and it brought into focus for us, oh my gosh, we live in a rural community. Many people are employed at restaurants or in the service industry. Even some of our home health clients were not able to work to their full capacity because the clients didn't want them in their homes.
Mhm.
So they needed food, they were hungry, and the kids are at home, and so eating more. So and then Medicaid, I think the spotlight has really been shined on health and being healthy, and so our Medicaid numbers have drastically increased as well. And then in terms of just creativity, our staff really, we've had babies held up to windows, um, we've had drive-by visits, we've had Zoom after Zoom after Zoom. Um, Zoom fatigue is real. And it's not as bad now. We are doing some limited in-person meetings with families, with masks required, obviously, and it's so nice to be able to get folks back in. But we still have virtual options for those who are not comfortable doing that. And COVID also, a really interesting point about the socioeconomic status. So it didn't matter, especially during the worst of it, how much money you had. Middlesex doesn't have grocery delivery. And while there were some limited pickup options here in the county, our major retailer Food Lion didn't offer that. They do now, but not at the worst of it. So so anyway, Bay Aging partnered with us and Hands Across Middlesex and the County of Middlesex and did this great dinner delivery program a couple of times a week, and helped out our local restaurants who prepared the meals, and then volunteers delivered the meals a few times a week. And we had folks, who, again, it didn't matter how much money they had, and of course those who did, better economically, I think contributed to Bay Aging, which was nice, but that wasn't a requirement. And so that's just one small, oh my goodness, we didn't think about that. Sadly, the funding ran out in December of 2020, but maybe that's a project we can look out for bringing back in the future, because I think that's a need. Again, no matter how much money you have, if you're not well enough to drive to the grocery store, yeah. So our COVID story continues and changes every day, as does everyone's. And so we are, again, we're focused on getting applications processed as quickly as possible so people can eat, and making sure children and vulnerable adults are safe. So
You guys do an amazing job. COVID has really shown the worst and the best of people. I think more of the best. I think we have all thought outside the box. We have identified areas of need that we had no idea were need. At Avalon, we identified that remote counseling was necessary, even post-COVID. I think that's something we're going to keep. So while we dip our toes in it and then we back up a little bit, and it's like 2 steps forward, 1 step back kind of with COVID. And I think that's going to be for the foreseeable future. I think we're going to do that. But I think all in all, the community, especially Middlesex, and being a new resident of Middlesex County, I see it. I see, of course, I'm a come here now. I'll be a come here for quite some time, but I see forever, I know. But I see that community and the sense of community here is just, it's like no other. So one of the reasons I came. And but I appreciate you guys. I wanted to open up the floor real quick. I'm watching my time. We're doing very well on time, actually. So I wanted to open the floor up if you guys had any questions for Rebecca. I would love to hear them. You can put it in the chat or you can unmute yourself. And I do have a question in here, and it says, is helping with rent utilities a statewide effort for social services, or does it vary between jurisdictions? And what qualifies a client for the assistance?
So that's a great question, Jessica. And I will say right now, during COVID, there is a federal program that is managed by the Department of Housing and Community Development at the state. So every Virginian is eligible potentially for rental assistance if the need directly or indirectly relates to COVID. And interpret that how you will, but it's very broad. And so right now, there is a lot of federal funding that can assist. And I think that Virginia is top in the nation for utilization of that program. So some states just haven't gotten programs up and running and gotten those funds out to tenants and landlords. And so there's two ways you can sort of enter that program. The tenant can do it or the landlord can do it. And before eviction can proceed, and this changes from day to day, the landlord is supposed to work with that tenant to try and work out a plan and be referred to this program. And so if anybody needs any additional information about that, just Google RMRP rent and mortgage, RMRP rent mortgage relief program, Virginia, and it'll come up. Or just reach out to me and I'll send you like the 10 flyers I have about it. So outside of COVID times, help with rental assistance varies from locality to locality. Some localities have very strong housing authorities or nonprofits who help with those. Here in Middlesex, again, we partner with local churches and our local food pantry, Hands Across Middlesex. Mm-hmm. And we have benevolence funds, and some of those are used for rental assistance. But that, Jessica, and that's a great question, that program does vary across jurisdiction. But again, right now with COVID, every Virginian is eligible for some kind of rental assistance if they meet the criteria, which is very broad.
Okay, great. Thank you so much. Does anybody else have questions? I am going to, while you guys are on here, well, Mary, actually, let's see, can I offer the poll? Mary, are you able to do the poll?
I will try.
It's not letting me. It says I'm logged in from another.
I should have just launched it.
Are you seeing, you did just launch it?
Mm-hmm. Does everyone see it?
No, I don't see it.
I saw it.
Oh, you did? Okay, great. How about everybody else? Does everybody else see the poll?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, great. And I'll give everybody a few minutes to do the poll. And Rebecca, you guys are amazing. The work that you do, we appreciate you so much. And I really appreciate the partnership that we have together with you guys at Avalon. And yeah, anything else you wanted to add in?
Yes, thank you so much for having me. I think the more we cross collaborate, and so I know prior to COVID, we were working on this wonderful training we were going to do, and it was going to be regional, and we were going to have 75 people show up. So maybe one day, but I think the more we collaborate, human services agencies, we need to stick together. We're stronger together. We can do more together. And I learned something every time, even though you invited me, I still learn something every time about Avalon when I speak to you that I'll pass on to my staff and they'll pass on to clients. And hopefully everyone learned a little bit about social services today. So if you're working with clients, maybe something you say or program that you mention to them can really help them achieve something great in their lives. So thanks for having me.
Thank you so much, Rebecca. And I learn more every time I talk to you. I feel like I get smarter every time. You make me want to be a better person, and that's the ultimate compliment. So, but anyway, Mary, are we doing okay on the poll?
We're just missing 2 people.
Okay. Well, I think that would be 1 and Rebecca would be 1, so we'll be okay.
Okay, I'll end it.
Okay. Well, you guys, thank you so much. Rebecca, I appreciate you. And we will see you next month for the next town hall.
Hi, everyone.
Bye.
Hey, Leslie, don't log off yet.
Okay, I'm not. I have to open my door because the air conditioner doesn't come in here unless the door's open. It's getting really hot. Oh. All right.
Okay, what do I do with the survey now?
It should go into, I don't know why it still wouldn't let me do it.
It says share results. Do you want me to hit that?
Yes, and then will it allow you to download the results?
Oh. No. It looks like it's sharing with like whoever's on the Zoom. Okay, that's weird. Stop sharing. Can you, are they in like the Avalon, the back end of Zoom somewhere?
I think they are. So I will look at that.
I've never been the one to launch that thing, so.
Hey, can you, oh, let me stop it.